Imagine standing on a rocky, windswept shoreline. You're looking across this 2.5 mile stretch of freezing slate gray water.
Right.
And you look at an island on the other side, but, you aren't just looking at another piece of land. You are quite literally looking at tomorrow.
It is wild to think about.
It really is, because the international dateline cuts directly through that narrow channel of water. So you can stand on your shore on a Tuesday, look across the strait, and, well, watch the inhabitants on the opposite island living their Wednesday.
Yeah, it's a total mind bender.
Completely. Welcome to the research desk of the topic Lens. Today we are undertaking a deep dive designed to build profound context and, enhanced understanding of the world around you.
Because that's what we do here.
Exactly. You are joining us for the latest installment of our ongoing series, Lens from Europe, seeing the U.S. state like a European.
And that geographical anomaly in the Bering Strait, the one you just mentioned, that's really just the beginning of the recalibration required for today's subject.
Oh, absolutely.
Because our focus brings us to the second state in the alphabetical order of the United States. Yet, by an overwhelming, almost incomprehensible margin, it is the largest in total area. We are, of course, examining Alaska.
Right. It's a territory so distinctly unique and massive that, as you've undoubtedly noticed on the thumbnail image for today's deep dive, or just on traditional maps of the U.S., it doesn't even fit in its actual geographical location.
No, it really doesn't.
Cartographers typically relegate it to this, tiny, detached inset box near the coast of Mexico, simply to make the national map printable.
Yeah, they just shrink it down and tuck it away.
Exactly. We are conditioned to think of the United States as a contiguous block of 48 states, with two outliers, Hawaii and Alaska, completely cut off from the rest of the country.
Which is a huge cartographic compromise.
Right. And that little box on the map is our starting point today. Because to really understand Alaska, you must first understand a specific, fundamental geographical definition. Alaska is an exclave.
Yes.
It is not an enclave.
And that distinction is absolutely foundational, especially for our European listeners.
Break that down for us.
Well, an enclave is a territory that is entirely surrounded by the territory of one other single state.
Like, San Marino, right?
Exactly. If you look at the map of Europe, the Republic of San Marino is an enclave because it's entirely landlocked and surrounded on all sides by the sovereign territory of Italy.
Right. You can't leave San Marino without entering Italy.
Right. An exclave, however, is a portion of a country that is geographically separated from the main part by surrounding alien territory.
So it's part of the club, but locked out of the clubhouse.
That's a great way to put it. Alaska is cut off from the contiguous United States by a massive continental expanse of Canadian land.
Which is huge.
It is. It's a fundamental geographic isolation that dictates its logistics, its psychology, and, well, its politics.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to systematically dismantle the postcard imagery you might associate with that isolation.
Yeah, we're going way past the stereotypes.
Right, stepping far past the superficial tropes of polar bears, gold miners, and, reality television hermits.
Although there are a few of those.
Fair enough. But instead, we're going to examine the profound realities of this exclave. We'll explore the immense physical scale, the unprecedented global power of its indigenous corporate structures.
Which is a fascinating topic on its own.
Completely. And we'll look at the paradox of its climate economy and a uniquely northern form of political independence.
But to truly grasp the reality of this state, we first have to break your mental map regarding scale and borders.
Let's do it. Hit us with the numbers.
Okay, so the numbers associated with Alaska, they demand a complete unlearning of how you perceive space. The state covers approximately 1.7 million square kilometers.
Unbelievable.
Right. To place that in a strict European context, if you were to overlay Alaska onto the continent of Europe, the state would stretch from the western coast of the United Kingdom all the way east to Greece.
Wait, really? The UK to Greece?
Literally. It possesses a landmass significantly larger than France, Spain, and Germany combined.
That is it's a scale that almost defies human administration.
It really does.
And here is where the European mind, or honestly any mind, truly struggles to process the reality of Alaska. You have a landmass larger than France, Spain, and Germany combined. Yet the human footprint upon that landmass is astonishingly minimal.
Very minimal.
The total population of Alaska is roughly 740,000 people.
Yeah.
To put that into perspective, 740,000 is approximately the population of the European nation of Luxembourg.
Which is tiny.
Right. I want you to visualize that. Imagine taking the entire population of Luxembourg and distributing those people across a landmass larger than 3 of Europe's largest nations.
You basically end up with nobody anywhere.
Exactly. You arrive at a population density of roughly 0.5 people per square kilometer.
Half a person per square kilometer. And the physical geography within that vast emptiness is equally extreme and, frankly, hostile to human infrastructure.
How so?
Well, Alaska doesn't just have mountains. It contains 39 distinct mountain ranges.
Wow. 39.
Yeah. It holds 17 of the 20 highest peaks in the entire United States, including Denali, which towers at over 20,000 feet, making it the highest peak in North America.
That's massive.
Furthermore, the state contains over 3 million individual lakes.
3 million.
Over 3 million. But the most defining characteristic of this geography, returning to our concept of the exclave, is its borders.
Right.
Alaska has absolutely no land border with any other state in the U.S. Its only land borders are shared with a foreign nation, Canada.
Specifically the territory of Yukon and the province of British Columbia, right?
Exactly. And that international border stretches for 1,538 miles through largely uninhabited wilderness.
Which brings up a fascinating geopolitical reality. When you lack a physical connection to your own country, your immediate foreign neighbors become your practical everyday reality.
Absolutely. Canada is the essential partner.
Right. It is required for transport, trade, and logistical survival. Like the Alaska Highway, which serves as the primary overland umbilical cord connecting the state to the rest of the U.S., runs entirely through Canadian sovereign territory.
Yeah, for decades, it was a logistical fact that an American citizen could not drive their own vehicle to their own state without formally traversing a foreign nation.
That's just wild to think about. But while Canada is the practical cooperative neighbor, Russia represents the historical and geopolitical neighbor.
Right. The Russian border is technically a maritime boundary, but the proximity is stark and heavily militarized.
How close are we actually talking?
The closest point between the North American mainland and the Russian mainland is a mere 55 miles across the Bering Strait.
55 miles. That's nothing.
It's a short ferry ride in most places. However, the true focal point of this proximity, the place where the geopolitical tension becomes hyper-localized, lies right in the middle of that strait, with the Diomede Islands.
Okay, this brings us back to the image we opened with.
Yes. The United States owns the island of Little Diomede. Russia owns the island of Big Diomede.
And the physical distance between these two islands is just 2.5 miles.
Exactly. A strong swimmer could cross it.
Yeah, and furthermore, the international date line was drawn directly through the water between them.
Which is why they have those nicknames.
Right. Yesterday Isle and Tomorrow Isle. Let's unpack the human element of that border, though, because that proximity carried severe and tragic human consequences during the 20th century.
It really did.
Prior to the dawn of the Cold War, the indigenous populations of those islands didn't recognize a geopolitical boundary.
Why would they?
Exactly. They crossed the winter ice freely, hunting together, intermarrying, and maintaining familial and cultural ties that spanned generations.
But then 1948 happened.
Right. In 1948, the Soviet Union abruptly recognized the strategic vulnerability of that border and enforced what became known globally as the Ice Curtain.
And the suddenness of that enforcement is just chilling. The border was sealed essentially overnight.
Just like that.
Yeah. Indigenous families were permanently separated. The residents of Big Diomede were forcibly relocated by the Soviet military deep into the Russian mainland, just to clear the island for a military installation.
That is heartbreaking.
It's a tragic reality. It really underscores how macro-level global conflicts manifest in the most remote, isolated regions of the world.
Totally. A family living in traditional harmony with the sea ice suddenly found themselves on the absolute front lines of a nuclear standoff.
Separated by 2.5 miles of water, they were legally forbidden to ever cross again.
Man, that geopolitical extremity also produces some truly mind-bending cartographic anomalies, does it not? We think of Alaska as the ultimate northwest frontier, but mathematically, that is incorrect.
It is entirely incorrect based on the strict rules of global coordinates.
Okay, explain that.
So because the Aleutian Island chain, which is a volcanic arc extending from the Alaskan Peninsula, because it stretches so incredibly far westward across the northern Pacific Ocean, it eventually crosses the 180th meridian.
And the 180th meridian is the dividing line between the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere.
Exactly. Therefore, by the strict definition of longitude, parts of Alaska are located in the Eastern Hemisphere.
Wait, so this means Alaska is technically the easternmost state in the United States?
Yes. It is simultaneously the northernmost, westernmost, and easternmost state.
That is a great trivia question right there.
It definitely is.
So if we overlay this entire reality onto the European mindset, a landmass larger than France, Spain, and Germany, populated by the equivalent of Luxembourg, fractured by mountain ranges and millions of lakes, cut off from its own nation, and brushing up against the Eastern Hemisphere, a critical question arises.
How does it even work?
Exactly. How does a society effectively function? When you have to string vital infrastructure such as roads, hospitals, and high-voltage power grids across that much empty, hostile space, how do you maintain a unified state?
It's an immense challenge.
Surviving in a space this vast requires a very specific psychological profile.
It requires a fundamental rewiring of the social contract, honestly. The psychological distance between an Alaskan and the rest of the country is just as vast as the physical distance.
Yeah, I've heard they have a specific term for the rest of us.
They do. Alaskans routinely refer to the contiguous United States simply as the lower 48, or even more tellingly as outside.
Outside, wow.
Yeah, when you refer to the rest of your own country as outside, it reveals a deeply ingrained island mentality.
For sure. They view themselves as residents of a distinct, self-contained frontier entirely separate from the mainland American experience.
Absolutely, and within their own internal culture, they draw a sharp, often unforgiving distinction between a sourdough and a chichaco.
Okay, let's examine those terms because they carry immense cultural weight and historical baggage. A sourdough is an experienced local, right?
Correct.
It's a resident who has survived the brutal, sunless winters and proven their physical and mental resilience.
And the origin of the term is fascinating.
Yeah, it originated during the frantic gold rush era of the late 19th century. It referred specifically to prospectors and miners who managed to keep their sourdough bread starter alive through the freezing, lethal months of winter by, get this, keeping it close to their bodies for warmth.
That is dedication to bread.
Right. Conversely, a chichaco is a newcomer.
Yeah, the greenhorn.
Exactly. It's someone who has freshly arrived from the outside and hasn't yet proven they possess the fortitude required to endure the Alaskan reality.
It is a profound gatekeeping mechanism, but it's not based on wealth, class, or ancestry, which is typical in many European societies.
What is it based on then?
It's based entirely on survival and endurance. Like, have you survived a winter where the sun does not rise?
Right.
Have you maintained your composure when a logistical failure means the grocery store has no fresh food for 3 weeks?
That would test anyone.
Definitely. This internal culture stands in stark contrast to the highly curated stereotypes projected by the outside media. National reality television programming frequently paints Alaskans as, like, rugged log cabin-dwelling hermits who spend their days wrestling bears in the untamed wilderness.
Yeah, the whole ice road truckers or mountain men vibe. But the demographic reality shatters that reality television myth completely.
It really does.
The city of Anchorage alone holds nearly 300,000 people.
Which is a huge chunk of the population.
Yeah, that accounts for roughly 40% of the state's entire population living in a single municipality. And Anchorage is a highly diverse, highly modern urban center.
Right. It has traffic jams, high-rise buildings, and fine dining.
It serves as the sheer logistical muscle of the state. It's where the cargo arrives, where the corporate headquarters are located, and where the heavy commerce happens.
Meanwhile, Juneau, the official state capital, functions as the administrative brain.
Right, and Juneau presents a geographical paradox that I think a European listener will find utterly baffling.
Oh, without a doubt. Juneau is a logistical anomaly. It's situated in the southeast panhandle of the state, precariously nestled on a narrow strip of land between impossibly steep forested mountains and the deep ocean channels of the Inside Passage.
So it's really wedged in there.
Completely. And because of this extreme topography, it is the only state capital in the United States that is entirely inaccessible by road from the rest of the continent.
Wait, you cannot drive to the capital city.
You cannot drive from Anchorage to Juneau. You cannot drive from Canada to Juneau.
So how do you get there?
You must arrive by commercial airplane, or you must arrive by sea via the state ferry system.
Imagine explaining that to a European citizen. It would be as if Germany concentrated all of its financial and commercial muscle in Frankfurt, but constitutionally mandated that the national parliament in Berlin could only be reached by taking a multi-day ferry ride through a coastal fjord.
It sounds absurd when you put it like that.
It operates almost like a foggy, isolated coastal principality, dominated almost exclusively by government administration and seasonal tourism.
While Anchorage handles the brutal heavy lifting of global logistics.
Exactly.
This extreme geographic division of labor creates a fascinating, enduring tension within the Alaskan psyche.
Tell me more about that.
Well, on one hand, you have a fierce, almost militant dedication to extreme self-reliance and libertarian political ideals. Residents pride themselves on their individual capability.
Right, the rugged individualism.
Yeah. The ideal Alaskan is someone who can repair a frozen engine block in negative 30-degree weather using only hand tools, entirely without government assistance or municipal support.
But on the other hand,
there is an absolute, undeniable necessity for community dependence.
I want to push back on that a bit, or at least explore the contradiction, because libertarianism and community dependence usually sit on opposite ends of the political spectrum.
They usually do, yeah.
So how do they reconcile that? If the core ethos is, leave me alone to survive on my own terms, how does a community actually form?
They reconcile it through the undeniable laws of thermodynamics and biology.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
Right. In severe, life-threatening climates, ideological individualism must ultimately bow to reality. You cannot survive absolute isolation when the environment itself is actively trying to kill you.
That makes sense.
If your heating oil runs out in January, your libertarian ideals will not stop you from freezing to death. You rely on your neighbor to lend you fuel, and you know with absolute certainty that you will do the same for them next month.
So it's a highly practical, non-ideological form of socialism born of absolute necessity.
Exactly. You are fiercely independent right up until the moment survival requires collective action.
That dynamic perfectly explains the deeply suspicious relationship between Anchorage and Juneau. We think of the American state model as a highly integrated apparatus, characterized by seamless interstate highways connecting commercial centers to political capitals.
Right.
But if you have to fly on a jet just to petition your own state legislature, isn't Alaska essentially operating as its own distinct republic masquerading as a state?
It certainly feels like it sometimes.
There have been multiple well-funded ballot initiatives attempting to move the capital from Juneau to Anchorage or to a newly built city closer to the population center.
And they always fail.
Yes, the voters consistently reject them. Why would citizens actively vote to keep their own government inaccessible to them?
Because Alaskans fundamentally distrust centralized power, and they prefer their politicians to be geographically isolated from the centers of wealth.
Nice.
Keeping the capital in Juneau, barricaded behind mountains and ocean, creates a literal, physical barrier against the expansion of government overreach.
It prevents the political class from seamlessly mingling with the commercial power brokers in Anchorage.
Yes, it is a deliberate, voter-enforced institutional inefficiency. By making government hard to reach, they believe they make it harder for the government to reach into their daily lives.
That is uniquely brilliant. And while the government hides in the fjords, Anchorage operates on a massive global scale that most people completely overlook.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, during the massive supply chain disruptions of the 2020 global pandemic, there was a brief period where the Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport became the world's busiest airport for cargo traffic.
Surpassing everyone.
How does a city of 300,000 people sitting on the edge of the Arctic suddenly outpace global megahubs like Hong Kong or London?
The answer lies in the geometry of a sphere, specifically Great Circle flight routes.
Okay, explain that for us.
When you look at a flat map, Anchorage seems isolated at the top left, but the Earth is a globe.
Right.
The shortest distance between the massive manufacturing centers of Asia and the massive consumption markets of North America and Europe is not a straight line across the Pacific Ocean.
No, because that would be inefficient.
Exactly. It is a curved trajectory straight over the North Pole. Anchorage is positioned precisely at the apex of that curve. It is exactly 9.5 hours by air from 90% of the industrialized world.
So it is the ultimate global pit stop.
Precisely.
If a European consumer in Paris purchases specialized electronics manufactured in Taipei or Seoul, there is a remarkably high statistical probability that the massive cargo plane carrying those goods touched down to refuel in Anchorage.
It's highly likely.
The city's geography makes it an indispensable node in the global capitalist supply chain.
It really does. However, this modern logistical web of cargo planes and commercial shipping sits directly on top of land that was navigated, managed, and mastered thousands of years before the concept of Alaska, the concept of America, or the concept of global supply chains ever existed.
That is a critical pivot.
To truly understand the state, to see beneath the modern infrastructure, You must understand the indigenous realities that shape its absolute foundation.
Yes, Alaska contains the highest percentage of indigenous people of any state in the U.S., comprising approximately 14.8% of the total population.
Which is significant.
For a European listener, or honestly for most Americans in the lower 48, there's a deeply inaccurate tendency to group all of these distinct peoples under the homogeneous, heavily stereotyped, and often offensive outsider term Eskimo.
Which we need to move past.
Exactly. The reality is a vast, complex mosaic of distinct nations. There are roughly 20 distinct cultural and linguistic groups, and 229 federally recognized tribes existing strictly within the state's borders.
It is essentially an entire continent of cultures, and their deep ancestral geography entirely dictates their societal structures.
Let's walk through some of those regions.
Sure. In the southeast panhandle, near Juneau, you find the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples. They inhabit dense, temperate rainforests bordering the ocean.
Oh, a rainforest in Alaska.
Yes. And because food resources like salmon and cedar were incredibly abundant, they didn't need to be highly nomadic.
Makes sense.
They developed complex, sedentary, matriarchal societies. They're globally renowned for their monumental wood carving, specifically totem poles.
Which are so often misunderstood.
Completely. Early Europeans assumed they were religious idols, but they are actually intricate historical records, legal documents, and clan lineage markers carved into massive cedar trunks.
Fascinating. Moving inland, away from the coast, and into the vast freezing interior of the state, the environment changes radically, and therefore the culture changes.
Right.
Here you encounter the Athabascan peoples. This environment is characterized by extreme temperature swings and endless boreal forests.
It's a very harsh environment.
Yeah, and because resources were spread out, the Athabascans were historically nomadic cultures, deeply and intricately tied to navigating the massive winding river systems like the Yukon, tracking caribou herds, and following seasonal fish runs.
Then, as you move to the extreme north, confronting the harsh, frozen expanse of the Arctic Ocean, you find the Inupiaq.
The sea ice cultures?
Yes, their entire culture, their spirituality, and their survival are intrinsically linked to the shifting sea ice and the highly coordinated communal hunting of massive bowhead whales.
That takes incredible skill.
It really does. In the southwest, along the Bering Sea coast, you find the Yupik and Kupik cultures, known for their incredible maritime adaptation and complex ceremonial mask carving.
And what about out in the islands?
Right, stretching far out into the violent storms of the Pacific Ocean along the Aleutian Islands, or the Anangacs, who developed some of the most advanced hydrodynamic skin boats in human history to hunt in open ocean swells.
I want to make a crucial correction here regarding popular European and American stereotypes. When people think of the Arctic, they picture the classic snow igloo.
Oh yes, the classic trope.
We see it in cartoons and movies and in advertising. But the snow igloo is not an Alaskan structure.
Not at all.
The construction of temporary shelters made entirely of blocks of compacted snow belongs historically to the Canadian and Greenlandic Inuit peoples living further east.
Exactly.
The Alaskan Inupiaq and other northern groups traditionally utilized highly insulated, semi-subterranean structures constructed using the massive ribs and jawbones of whales layered with earth and insulating turf.
Which is brilliant engineering.
It was. It was a permanent, highly engineered architecture designed to trap heat, not a dome of snow.
That distinction highlights how tailored each culture is to its highly specific microenvironment. However, the modern legal and economic reality of all these diverse groups was fundamentally and permanently altered in 1971.
Oh, this is a massive turning point.
It is. This occurred with the passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which is universally referred to simply as ANCSA.
ANCSA.
Right. To understand ANCSA, you have to understand the geopolitical panic of the late 1960s.
Set the stage for us.
Well, in 1968, massive, world-altering reserves of crude oil were discovered at Prudhoe Bay on the extreme northern coast of Alaska, right on the edge of the Arctic Ocean.
But discovering the oil was only half the problem, right?
Less than half.
The oil was in the extreme north, but the ports needed to ship that oil to the global market were in the south.
Exactly, separated by 800 miles of unforgiving wilderness, mountain ranges, and seismic fault lines.
So the oil companies needed to build the Trans-Alaska Pipeline across the entire state.
But they hit an insurmountable legal wall.
What happened?
They couldn't proceed because the indigenous peoples of Alaska had never legally ceded their land rights to the United States government.
Yeah.
There were no treaties.
Ah, so it wasn't federal land to give away.
Exactly. The federal government and the multinational oil conglomerates needed a rapid, bulletproof legal solution to clear the land titles so infrastructure development could begin.
And the legislation that emerged from this panic, ANCSA, was entirely revolutionary.
Completely. It rejected the historical precedents set in the contiguous United States.
Right. In the lower 48, the U.S. government utilized a reservation system, forcing indigenous populations onto geographically restricted, federally managed trust lands.
Which often resulted in deep intergenerational poverty and a loss of sovereignty.
ANCSA completely abandoned the reservation concept. Instead, it established a corporate model.
This is where it gets really unique.
The indigenous people of Alaska agreed to extinguish their Aboriginal land claims across the vast majority of the state. In exchange, they received $962 million in initial capital and the fee simple title to 180,000 square kilometers of land.
Let me stop you there, because we need to explain the mechanics of fee simple title to our listeners.
What do you do?
When we talk about reservations in the rest of America, that land is usually held in trust by the federal government.
Right.
The tribe occupies it, but the government essentially owns the deed, which restricts the tribe's ability to develop the land, secure mortgages, or utilize it as collateral for economic growth.
That's a huge limitation.
It is. But fee simple title means absolute unencumbered ownership. The land and the initial capital from the settlement were not handed over to traditional tribal governments.
Instead, the federal government mandated the creation of corporate entities.
Exactly.
The assets were transferred to 13 newly created regional corporations, mapped roughly along the historic cultural boundaries we discussed earlier, and over 200 smaller village corporations.
And here's the kicker.
What's that?
Every eligible indigenous person of Alaskan descent, born before the legislative cutoff date, was issued 100 shares of stock in their respective regional and village corporations.
Wow. They literally became corporate shareholders of their own ancestral lands.
Exactly. It's a staggering paradigm shift. Today, these native corporations are not quaint local community boards.
Not at all.
They are massive, multi-billion-dollar global economic engines. They engage in international real estate development. They hold massive federal defense contracts managing logistics for the U.S. military. They operate global shipping fleets, and they engage heavily in resource extraction, including oil drilling and timber harvesting.
It has created a profound dual reality. Indigenous people in Alaska hold massive economic and political leverage on a global corporate scale.
Yet simultaneously, despite this corporate framework, many of these exact same shareholders continue to rely heavily on traditional subsistence living.
Right. They continue to hunt caribou, fish for salmon, and forage for berries for their daily literal survival.
And it is vital to understand that subsistence in rural Alaska is not a recreational choice, is not a weekend hobby.
No, it's an absolute, unavoidable necessity.
Right, due to the extreme logistical costs of transporting modern groceries to isolated rural communities off the road system.
I mean, a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread flown into a remote village can cost 5 to 10 times what it costs in a European city. If you don't hunt, you cannot afford to eat.
This presents a fascinating, almost paradoxical pivot. They essentially weaponized the ultimate tool of Western capitalism, the corporation, to ensure their own self-determination and protect their land from federal overreach.
But I have to ask, does turning a deeply spiritual, traditional, cultural identity into a profit-driven corporate shareholder structure create a profound conflict?
Oh, absolutely it does.
Because the corporation has a legal mandate to generate profit, but the culture has a spiritual mandate to protect the earth.
It creates an intense, ongoing internal friction that defines modern Alaskan indigenous politics.
How so?
Well, the leadership of a native corporation has a strict legal fiduciary duty under state corporate law to maximize profits and distribute dividends to their shareholders.
Right, that's business 101.
Often the most lucrative way to fulfill that fiduciary duty is to engage in heavy timber harvesting or lease lands for oil drilling. Yet, those exact same lands are the vital ecosystems required for the subsistence hunting that their shareholders depend upon to feed their families.
It is a balancing act of monumental proportions. You have this incredible modern dichotomy where an indigenous corporate executive might spend Tuesday in a high-rise boardroom in Seattle wearing a tailored suit, negotiating billion-dollar federal defense logistics contracts, and then fly home to their ancestral village on Friday, pack up their gear, and head out onto the freezing sea ice to hunt bowhead whale.
just to ensure their elders have enough meat for the winter.
The corporate structure was born directly out of the need to extract resources, which brings us to the very engine that funds the entire state apparatus and the existential threat that now jeopardizes its future.
Alaska's modern existence is inextricably tethered to resource extraction. It has always been a resource-driven economy.
Always. Historically, it was the Russian Empire exploiting the sea otter fur trade to the brink of extinction.
Right. And that was followed by the massive, chaotic gold rushes in places like Fairbanks and Nome, which brought waves of prospectors from the outside.
Then it was the commercial seafood industry, harvesting billions of pounds of salmon and crab.
But ultimately, in the late 20th century, the master resource became crude oil.
And the discovery of oil entirely transformed the state's relationship with its citizens. Because of the vast, unprecedented revenues generated by taxing petroleum extraction on state-owned lands, Alaska became incredibly wealthy.
Very wealthy.
As a result, Alaska levies absolutely no state income tax on its residents. Furthermore, it levies no general state sales tax.
This is pretty rare in the U.S.
It is. But the most famous mechanism of this oil wealth is the Alaska Permanent Fund. It's a massive state-owned sovereign wealth fund, originally designed to invest a portion of the finite oil revenues, so that when the oil eventually runs out, the state wouldn't face immediate bankruptcy.
To help our European listeners conceptualize this, the Alaska Permanent Fund functions remarkably similarly to Norway's government pension fund, Global.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, it takes the revenues from a non-renewable fossil fuel and invests it globally in real estate, bonds, and equities. But we must make a crucial distinction regarding how the citizens interact with this fund.
Right. Every year, eligible Alaskan residents receive a permanent fund dividend, known locally as the PFD.
The PFD, yeah.
It's effectively a direct annual cash payment from the state government to the individual citizen.
And here's the mechanism that is frequently misunderstood. This annual dividend check does not come directly from the oil royalties pumped out of the ground that specific year.
Wait, really? I think a lot of people assume it's basically a cut of the oil sales.
They do, but it's not. The dividend is paid out from the investment returns generated by the permanent fund's diverse global portfolio. So that if the global stock market performs well, the dividend might be higher, regardless of what the price of a barrel of oil is doing on the commodities market.
That is fascinating. It operates similarly to a localized universal basic income, creating a direct, highly politicized financial link between the resident, the state's historical resources, and the fluctuations of global financial markets.
However, the foundation of this immense wealth, the oil infrastructure itself, is currently facing a catastrophic, almost tragic paradox.
Because of climate change.
Yes. Alaska is geographically positioned to experience the impacts of global climate change at an incredibly accelerated rate. The Arctic region is warming approximately 4 times faster than the global average.
4 times? That's alarming.
It is. This rapid warming is devastating the physical environment, particularly a crucial geological feature known as permafrost.
Permafrost being a thick subsurface layer of soil that remains permanently frozen throughout the year.
Exactly, and it underlies the vast majority of the state's landmass.
This presents the ultimate undeniable climate irony. The 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the massive steel artery that pumps the oil and keeps the entire state's economy alive, was constructed directly over and supported by this permafrost.
When the pipeline was built in the 1970s, the ground was rock solid.
But because the permafrost is now rapidly thawing due to rising global temperatures, the ground is turning into a saturated, unstable swamp. The earth is literally subsiding, threatening to buckle the steel pylons that hold the pipeline above the ground.
And to prevent the pipeline from collapsing and causing an unprecedented environmental disaster, the oil companies have been forced into an extraordinary engineering workaround.
What are they doing?
They are installing thousands of artificial cooling systems, known as thermosiphons, deep into the earth around the pipeline supports.
Wait, artificial cooling systems? For the ground?
Yes. These are massive tubes filled with anhydrous ammonia that passively pull heat out of the ground during the winter, radiating it into the air, to mechanically freeze the ground back into solid ice.
Let me make sure I'm stating this clearly for the listener. The oil companies are mechanically freezing the thawing earth so they can stabilize the infrastructure, so they can continue to safely pump the hot crude oil, which is then burned globally, directly contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions that are melting the ground beneath their pipeline in the first place.
You've got it. It is a devastating, multi-billion-dollar feedback loop.
That's just wild.
It is the defining paradox of the modern Alaskan economy. And the consequences of this thaw extend far beyond industrial infrastructure. They are exacting a brutal human toll.
You're talking about the climate refugees.
Exactly. We are currently witnessing the creation of America's very first climate refugees within Alaska's borders.
Yeah.
Coastal indigenous villages, such as the community of Shishmare, are literally falling into the ocean.
How does that happen so fast?
Historically, these remote coastal communities were naturally protected from violent winter storm surges by thick, land-fast sea ice that acted as a buffer against the waves.
But with the Arctic warming so rapidly, the sea ice forms much later in the year, and it is much thinner.
Right. So when the massive autumn storms roll in from the Bering Sea, there is no ice buffer.
The ocean waves crash directly against the fragile coastline, rapidly eroding the sandy soil right out from under the residents' homes, schools, and airstrips.
And relocating a single, isolated village to safer ground further inland is an engineering nightmare that costs hundreds of billions of dollars.
Who pays for that?
That's the problem. The funding mechanisms for this managed retreat are entirely unresolved. The federal government and the state government are paralyzed over who bears the financial responsibility for moving these ancient communities.
It's a slow-motion disaster, and the warming climate is also destroying the very foundation of food security in the north, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
For thousands of years, indigenous communities have utilized traditional underground ice cellars. They dig deep into the permafrost to create natural, zero-energy freezers.
Right. This is where subsistence hunters store tons of whale, seal, and caribou meat to sustain their communities through the long winter.
But now, with the permafrost thawing, those ancient ice cellars are warming up, filling with groundwater and collapsing. The vital winter food supplies are literally rotting in the ground.
It's catastrophic. The entire state's economic survival, its ability to fund schools, roads, and the permanent fund dividend, relies almost entirely on the very industry that is melting the ground beneath its infrastructure and its people.
How does a society effectively plan for the future when its physical foundation is literally turning to mud?
That existential conflict plays out fiercely and constantly in the political arena, most notably in the decades-long bitter war over the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, commonly known as ANWR. Right. This is a massive, pristine tract of federally protected land in northeastern Alaska. Geologists believe it sits above billions of barrels of potential untapped oil reserves.
And it has triggered a 40-year political war in Washington, D.C. between the forces of environmental preservation and the forces of industrial extraction.
And what makes this debate so complex is that it's not just environmentalists versus oil executives. This conflict deeply divides the indigenous communities themselves.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, the Inupiat people, who reside on the North Slope near the proposed drilling sites, frequently favor resource extraction.
Why?
They argue that taxing the oil infrastructure provides the essential municipal revenue required to build modern schools, hospitals, and sanitation systems in the remote villages. They view it as an issue of economic sovereignty.
Okay, that makes total sense. But who is on the other side?
But conversely, the Gwich'in people, an Athabascan culture who live further south near the Canadian border, vehemently oppose any drilling in ANWR.
Why are they opposed?
They revere the coastal plain of the refuge as the sacred calving grounds of the massive porcupine caribou herd. Their entire culture, spirituality, and nutritional survival rely on the health and migration of that specific caribou herd.
So to the Gwich'in, drilling in ANWR is not an economic debate. It is a direct threat to their continued existence as a distinct people.
Precisely.
Managing these massive existential conflicts, balancing billions of dollars in oil wealth against the survival of ancient cultures and melting permafrost, requires a political system that refuses to play by standard American partisan rules.
It really does.
To understand how Alaskan politics actually functions, we must first look at its historical European echoes, which shaped its early demographic mindset.
Because the European influence in Alaska extends far beyond the legacy of the Russian fur trade.
Right. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thousands of Scandinavians and Finns immigrated directly to the territory of Alaska.
They were drawn to a landscape, an ocean, and a harsh climate they inherently understood from their homelands.
Accustomed to maritime economies, deep fjords, and the long, dark, sunless winters, a psychological weight that Alaskans refer to as the Big Dark.
The Big Dark, yeah. These Nordic immigrants were instrumental in building the commercial fishing and boat-building industries in the southeast panhandle.
Like Petersburg, right.
Yes, towns like Petersburg were founded by Norwegian fishermen and are still known today as Little Norway, maintaining incredibly strong cultural ties to their Scandinavian roots.
They brought a distinct Nordic sensibility to the frontier. It was an ethos of working pragmatically within the severe constraints of nature, building sturdy communal infrastructure, rather than the typical American frontier ethos of attempting to aggressively conquer and subdue the landscape.
Which is an important distinction.
When we examine the modern political landscape that grew out of this pragmatic survivalism, Alaska consistently leans Republican in national presidential elections. However, framing the state simply as a standard, predictable, conservative stronghold, like you might find in the American Deep South, is highly inaccurate.
It is entirely inaccurate at the local level. Over 50% of registered voters in Alaska actively choose to register as nonpartisan or undeclared.
Over half the state.
Yeah. They look at the national political apparatus and actively reject the traditional two-party duopoly of Democrats and Republicans.
And this deeply ingrained independent streak led Alaska voters to bypass the legislature entirely and pass a ballot initiative implementing a highly unique, structurally radical electoral mechanism, the ranked choice voting system.
Utilizing a top 4 open primary.
Let's break down the mechanics of this voting system because it fundamentally alters the mathematics of how politicians campaign.
It really does.
In a traditional American primary, Republicans run against Republicans and Democrats run against Democrats, which usually pushes candidates to the extreme edges of their respective parties to win the primary base.
Right. But in Alaska's open primary, all candidates, regardless of their party affiliation, run on a single unified ballot.
And the top 4 vote-getters, regardless of party, advance to the general election.
Then, in the general election, the voters do not just select one person. They rank the 4 candidates in order of their preference. First choice, second choice, third choice, and fourth choice.
And if no single candidate secures an absolute mathematical majority over 50% of the first choice votes, an instant runoff occurs.
Right. The lowest performing candidate is eliminated. But the votes for that eliminated candidate do not simply disappear.
No. Instead, those ballots are redistributed to whichever candidate those voters marked as their second choice.
This elimination and redistribution process continues mathematically until one candidate crosses the 50% threshold.
Let me walk through a hypothetical scenario to show exactly why this matters.
Go for it.
Imagine a highly polarizing extremist candidate.
Yeah.
They have a rabid base and secure 40% of the first place votes.
Okay.
But because they are so polarizing, absolutely no one else ranks them as their second choice. Now imagine a moderate, pragmatic candidate. They only get 30% of the first place votes. But because they are reasonable and willing to compromise, the voters who pick the eliminated candidates overwhelmingly rank the moderate as their second choice. Under ranked choice voting, the moderate wins because they built the broadest consensus.
Exactly. The results of this system are profound for governance. It structurally and mathematically punishes political extremism, negative campaigning, and ideological purity tests.
Because you cannot afford to alienate your opponent's supporters. You desperately need their second choice votes to win.
Because of this system and the state's independent streak, Alaska's state legislature is frequently governed by highly unusual bipartisan coalitions.
Where moderate Republicans, centrist Democrats, and independent rural legislators literally share power, chairing committees together to keep the government functioning.
It creates a political environment that allows for the simultaneous statewide election of a moderate Republican senator, Lisa Murkowski, who frequently bucks her national party leadership and survives primary challenges from the far right because she appeals to the broad center.
Alongside an indigenous Democratic representative, Mary Peltola, who won a statewide race by campaigning on a platform of protecting fisheries and working across the aisle.
You will not find that combination in almost any other American state.
It proves that the true political divide in Alaska is not the standard American left versus right or conservative versus liberal. The real fault lines run along entirely different axes.
As are they?
The true debates are resource extraction versus environmental conservation, asserting state autonomy versus fighting federal bureaucratic control from Washington, D.C., and protecting the rights of rural indigenous subsistence hunters versus ensuring equal access for urban sport hunters from Anchorage.
There is a deeply ingrained Alaskan Independence Party mentality simmering beneath all of this. Even if the actual registered political party by that name is relatively small in numbers, the underlying psychological sentiment is massive. The belief that Washington, D.C. is a distant, out-of-touch, almost imperial colonizer making decisions about Alaskan land without understanding Alaskan realities resonates deeply across the entire political spectrum.
From the most conservative oil worker to the most progressive indigenous rights activist.
Exactly.
If over half the state refuses to join a political party, and they have successfully implemented a voting system that mathematically disarms partisan extremism, a compelling question arises for the rest of the country.
Right.
Is Alaska, despite its isolation and paradoxes, actually providing a viable, tested blueprint for breaking the partisan gridlock that is currently paralyzing the rest of the United States?
They certainly have a history of enacting pragmatic progressivism when it suits the needs of their survival. Long before the modern era, they understood that on the frontier, every competent adult must be empowered.
For instance, women in the territory of Alaska achieved the right to vote in 1913.
Way early.
That was 6 full years before the 19th Amendment was ratified to grant women that fundamental democratic right on a national level. When survival is on the line, artificial societal hierarchies break down very quickly.
That pragmatic independence, that stripping away of the unnecessary, is perfectly encapsulated in their modern culture of endurance. It dictates not just how they govern, but how Alaskans play, how they compete, and how they choose to elevate their heroes.
Unlike almost every other major population center in America, Alaska has absolutely no major league sports teams.
None.
There is no NFL franchise, no NBA team, and no Major League Baseball team to unite the state on a Sunday afternoon.
Therefore, the entire culture of sports and competition devolves down to the hyperlocal level, and it revolves almost entirely around the concept of endurance and fierce regional pride.
You see this vividly in the intense, brutal college hockey rivalries, specifically the annual series where the University of Alaska Anchorage Seawolves battle the University of Alaska Fairbanks Nanooks for the Governor's Cup.
But while hockey is popular, the undisputed pinnacle of Alaskan sport, the event that defines the state's athletic identity, is the Iditarod.
The Iditarod.
The Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race is a grueling, unforgiving 1,000-mile dog sled race across the absolute worst of the frozen wilderness, traversing jagged mountain ranges, frozen rivers, and dense forests from Anchorage to Nome.
But it is vital to understand that for Alaskans, the Iditarod is not merely an extreme sport. It is a living, breathing historical monument. The race commemorates the legendary 1925 Serum Run to Nome.
And the narrative of that Serum Run is the ultimate distillation of the Alaskan ethos.
Tell the story.
In the dead of winter in 1925, a deadly outbreak of diphtheria threatened to wipe out the children of the isolated coastal town of Nome. The town doctor sent out a desperate distress call over the telegraph.
The life-saving antitoxin serum was located in Anchorage, but Nome was entirely icebound by the sea.
They attempted to use the newly invented airplanes of the era, but the open cockpit aircraft simply couldn't start or fly in the extreme -50-degree cold and blinding blizzards. Modern technology completely failed them.
So what was the alternative?
The only remaining option, the only way to deliver the medicine before the children died, was via a relay of traditional dog sled teams. Over the course of 5.5 days, a relay of 20 mushers and over 150 sled dogs transported the fragile glass vials of medicine across nearly 700 miles of brutal, lethal terrain in the middle of a continuous blizzard.
Wow.
The final leg was run by musher Gunnar Kaasen, whose lead dog, Balto, famously navigated the team through whiteout conditions where Kaasen couldn't even see the dogs tethered closest to his sled.
They delivered the serum and saved the town.
They did.
The modern Iditarod race honors that exact legacy of absolute endurance, the bond between human and animal, and the triumph of sheer will against lethal natural forces. It says so much about the psychology of a place when their most famous athletes aren't throwing a ball in a climate-controlled, multi-billion-dollar stadium, but are instead surviving 1,000 miles of frozen wilderness with a team of dogs, sleep-deprived and battling frostbite.
It begs the question, does their cultural concept of celebrity fundamentally require an element of survival?
Look at the figures from Alaska who have permeated the national consciousness. They all, regardless of their profession, fit the frontier mold.
Like who?
You have Sarah Palin in national politics projecting a specific brand of rugged, hunting-oriented populism. You have the musician Jewel, who grew up homesteading with no indoor plumbing and essentially yodeled her way to international stardom.
That's right, she did.
You have the voice actress Irene Bedard, Kikan Randall, the Olympic gold medal cross-country skier who dominated European competitors, and the legendary Susan Butcher, a 4-time champion of the Iditarod. They all project a specific type of rugged, unyielding resilience.
Because they lack those massive corporate sports franchises to provide a pre-packaged communal identity, community bonds are forged through massive social rituals that actively bridge the vast geographical divides we discussed earlier.
Right. Like in the depths of winter, high school basketball tournaments, often referred to affectionately as March Madness Alaska, become monumental logistical undertakings.
Small villages will spend tens of thousands of dollars to charter small bush planes just to fly a team of 10 teenagers across a mountain range to play a basketball game in another village.
It is about far more than basketball. It is a critical gathering point to maintain social cohesion across the void.
Similarly, the Native Youth Olympics serve as massive, culturally vital events. Traditional indigenous games, designed centuries ago to test the specific physical skills required for hunting and surviving on the ice, like the seal hop or the high kick, are preserved and celebrated as competitive sports.
They bring disparate, geographically isolated communities together in a shared celebration of ancestral skill and physical endurance.
This profound connection to the land, to survival, and to the immense sky above them is beautifully and permanently represented in the state flag.
Oh, the story of the Alaskan state flag is a masterpiece of design and history. It was not designed by a committee of politicians arguing in a boardroom in Juneau.
No, it wasn't.
It was not commissioned by an expensive advertising agency in Anchorage. It was designed in 1927 by Benny Benson. He was a 13-year-old orphan of Alutiiq, Russian, and Swedish descent.
Living in a territorial orphanage in the town of Seward, this 13-year-old boy looked up at the night sky, the very sky that dominates the Alaskan winter, and translated it perfectly onto a blue field.
He placed 8 simple gold stars on the flag. 7 of those stars form the constellation of the Big Dipper, which he stated represented strength. The Big Dipper points directly to the 8th star, the North Star, Polaris, which he declared represented the future of the northernmost territory.
From a design perspective, it is a masterclass in vexillology. It completely rejects the overly complex, unreadable crests, Latin mottos, and detailed state seals that clutter the flags of almost every other American state.
Benny Benson's simple, elegant design won the territorial competition, earning the young orphan a prize of $1,000 and an engraved watch.
It is a profound, poetic symbol of a child of the wilderness defining a territory's identity. And that identity was so perfect, so universally accepted by the people, that it remained entirely unchanged when Alaska finally achieved official statehood in 1959.
As we conclude this extensive deep dive into the realities of the 49th state, we must inevitably return to the concept of the sourdough mentality we discussed earlier.
That fierce, unyielding, gatekeeping capability to survive at the absolute edge of the world defined Alaska for a century. But the overarching existential question for Alaska's immediate future is whether that sourdough mentality can survive the modern global thaw.
Because the ice is melting. As the Arctic sea ice physically vanishes, new, highly lucrative global shipping lanes are opening entirely across the top of the world. Cargo ships and military vessels are navigating waters that were previously locked in ice.
Alaska is rapidly shifting from being America's isolated frozen backyard, ignored by the lower 48, to occupying the absolute strategic center of a newly contested global geopolitical chessboard.
The frontier is rapidly closing. The sheer, brutal geographical isolation that historically defined, shaped, and protected the unique Alaskan identity is evaporating under the heat of global climate change and the relentless expansion of international trade.
Will the sourdough survive when the edge of the world becomes the center of the global economy?
That is the question. Thank you for joining us at the Research Desk for this deep dive into the complex, contradictory reality of Alaska. We hope this has provided you with a clear lens through which to view this immense and fascinating exclave. Next time, our journey crosses the Atlantic as we put the spotlight on Armenia, viewed through an American lens. And who knows, while visiting the Caucasus, we might finally find out why white people in the United States are officially categorized as Caucasian. Until then, keep questioning the map.